All right, so this is Dr. William Painter. This is the fifth Sunday after Pentecost, proper 5, for those of you who keep score of those things. This has been an interesting week in American culture, a week where we recognize the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. I'm going to open our song and sermon with a song from Woody Guthrie, written in 1948. It may have been his last most important social change song. And it was about the same problems that we have today, and that is our willingness to dehumanize people of different colors or different religions or different cultures and then exploit their labor and claim it as our own. And then blame them for being here. This song is about a plane wreck, actually, that happened, a real plane wreck, over Los Gatos Canyon in California, and it was carrying, I think, 4 Americans and 40 some odd immigrants, migrant workers, who have been brought over to the States on the Bracero program to work on a contract, and then when the contract was over, they would be returned home. Transportation provided either by the employer or by the U.S. Immigration Department. This was such a plane that was returning these migrant farm workers back to Mexico, and it caught fire and it died. And what made Woody write this song was that he heard on the radio, heard them described not as people, but as deportees. And he intends to give them names here and to humanize them. And that is, in fact, the theme of this week's song and sermon, humanizing those around us who are our brothers and sisters. So, Deportee, 1948, Woody Guthrie, great American troubadour. Are all in and the peaches are rotting and the oranges are piled in their Korea-soaked dumps. They're flying you back to the Mexico border to pay all your money to wait back again. Goodbye to my one, goodbye Rosalita, adios mis amigos, Jesus y Maria. You won't have a name when you ride that big airplane, and all they will call you will be deportees. My father's own father, he waded that river, and they took all the money that he made in his life. My brothers and sisters come work in the fruit trees. They rode the big trucks till they laid down and died. Well, goodbye to my one, goodbye Rosalita, adios mis amigos, Jesus y Maria. You won't have a name when you ride that big airplane, and all they will call you will be deportees. The skyplane caught fire over Los Gatos Canyon, a fireball of lightning, and it shook all our hills. Who are all these comrades that died like zombies? The radio says they were just deportees. Goodbye to my one, goodbye Rosalita, adios mis amigos, Jesus y Maria. You won't have a name when you ride that big airplane, and all they will call you will be deportees. But we died in your hills, and we died in your deserts, and we died in your valleys, and we died on your plains. We died neath your trees, and we died in your bushes, both sides of the river. Well, we died just the same. Goodbye to my one, goodbye Rosalita, adios mis amigos, Jesus y Maria. You won't have a name when you ride that big airplane, and all they will call you will be deportees. rejected our work contracts out and we have to move on. But it's 600 miles to that Mexican border. They chase us like rustlers, like outlaws, like thieves. Goodbye, my one. Goodbye, Rosarita. Adios, mis amigos. Jesus Maria. You won't have a name when you ride that big airplane, and all they will call you will be deportees. Is this the best way we can grow our big orchards? And is this the best way we can grow our good fruit? To fall down like dry leaves and rot on the topsoil, and be called by no name except deportee. Goodbye to my one, goodbye, Rosalita. Adios, mis amigos, Jesus Maria. You won't have a name when you ride that big airplane. All they will call you will be deportee. All right, let me put this instrument back up, and I'll join you for the second. All right, so here we are. The reading today comes from Mark chapter 3, verses 20 to 35. And the crowd came together again, so they could not even eat. When his family heard it, they went out to restrain him, for people were saying, "He's gone out of his mind." And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem said, "He has Beelzebub, by the ruler of the demons he casts out demons." And he called them to him and spoke to them in parables. "How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, the house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but his end has come. But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man. Then indeed the house can be plundered. Truly I tell you, people will be forgiven for their sins and whatever blasphemies they utter. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit can never have forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin. For they had said, 'He has an unclean spirit.' Then his mother and brothers came, and standing outside, they sent to him and called him. The crowd was sitting round him, and they said to him, 'Your brothers and your sisters are outside asking for you.' And he replied, 'Who are my mother and my brothers?' And looking at those who sat around him, he said, 'Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother.' Thus endeth the gospel." Now that passage has got a lot of things going on it, as they all do. This one in particular has been used as a justification for people leaving their families, joining monasteries or other conventual orders, even joining cults. They've said, "Well, my family's not important, but my brothers and sisters are here." But I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about. I think what he's talking about is that we are all brothers and sisters in this. You don't choose your mother, you don't choose your brothers and sisters, but the people you do choose to be with are your brothers and your sisters and your mother. In other words, we belong to a much broader family. And in that one statement, in that one sentence, he humanizes everybody around him, because you can't say my brother or my sister or my mother without them being human, without them being real to you. And this is what Jesus is doing. He's making these people, these nameless, faceless people, the crowd, that's referred, multiple times. The crowd this, crowd that. He fed the crowd. The crowd demanded that he be crucified. They are nameless and faceless participants in this story that he immediately humanizes by saying, "Those people sitting around me are my brothers and sisters and mother." Okay. Now, in our great Protestant traditions, and I think I think I can lay this clearly at the feet of Protestantism and its legacy. We have this extraordinary ability to dehumanize those who are not like us, to assume that those unlike us are not chosen, are not of the elect, are not one of the good guys, as it were, not one of us, not one of our tribe. And what we end up doing is we end up enslaving them and then blaming them for being slaves. This country was built on the labor of black people imported from Africa, doing jobs and doing work that the people here didn't want to do themselves. I mean, it's just that simple. There's a little meme passing around. I think it says people who were too lazy to do the work themselves are accused, and the descendants of slaves of being lazy. and that's just about sums it up. Because once freed, the African people of African heritage, they began to flourish. They began to start businesses. They began to, once the fruits of their labor were not harvested by their owners anymore, they became fruitful. they had their own Wall Street, and they had thriving communities around this country that in 1921 the white folks burned to the ground. They literally dropped bombs from airplanes on the black community in Tulsa in 1921, burning women and children and men alive in their own homes. And they had done nothing wrong. They had done nothing to deserve it other than living the American dream. And I think that, I come from a proud tradition of agitators. My grandfather, I knew my grandfather, my parents, my father and his family were raised in Tulsa. And I heard about this. They called it a race riot. And at a very early age, my father corrected that for me. He said it wasn't a race riot, it was a white riot against black folks. And I never understood. I'm a child, right? I never understood what he meant by that until in later years when I realized that it was simply a massacre. That the white folks in Tulsa just decided they were going to take what the black folks had made and take it for themselves as though they were slaves. And it didn't just happen in Tulsa, it happened around the country. You'll notice that there are African American neighborhoods in just about every small town in Texas, and that neighborhood is located as far away as a black person could run while the white folks chased them. And that's where they stayed. So usually in the southern part, South Dallas, South Denton, South Fort Worth, where they had their safe enclaves because they could get away from the white folks, run away from the white folks. And now we're not supposed to teach that in schools. But there's an important lesson there, not only as a citizen, but as a human being. Now, I said my grandfather, what did he do during this race riot, during this massacre? Well, he was known for having run into this conflagration. There was a black man with a noose around his neck being pulled by a vehicle, and my grandfather, whom I only knew as Papa, ran up to him and pulled out his knife. And I'm going to tell you, Papa carried a serious knife with him everywhere he went, and cut the rope and let that man free. And then the mob, of course, turned on him for being a white man who betrayed the white supremacy code that white folks stick up for each other. But at that moment there, my grandfather chose who his brothers and sisters and mother were. And they weren't who he was born to. It wasn't the white folks he was born to. It was the black folks who were being killed. Now, Roman society was a society based on slave labor. They brought slaves in from all over the empire to work the fields. The Romans themselves produced nothing They produced laws and armies and roads. And that was it. Now, yes, there was a lot of wonderful architecture that still survives today in one form or another, and I just appreciate it all the way down to the ground. But I also know who built those architectural structures, and they were not freemen, they were slaves. And Roman society as an empire, the Roman Empire, was predicated on slavery, as is the American Empire. The American West was conquered, the American South was exploited by the labor and efforts of slaves. Now, some of those slaves were forcibly imported. Some of those slaves willingly came over to be exploited, like the deportees in Woody Guthrie's song. We bring people into this country, like the Chinese. I mean, we could talk for quite a while about how the Chinese were, recruited into this country and then not allowed to have any voice or any rights or any citizenship at all, even though they had built the railroads that tied West and East together, that allowed the rest of us to flourish in our academic or economic activities. It is time as Christians to stand up and say that this is wrong, and it has always been wrong. It is time for Christians to stand up and say, these are my brothers and my sisters and my mother. These people who are being exploited, these people who are whose labor is being taken from them because they're illegal. I have a real problem with illegal human beings. Okay, and for them to be here illegally. Well, they come here to work. They don't just wake up one morning, they were wandering around and found themselves, they came here to work and someone hired them at substandard wages because they were here illegally and could be sent back. So instead of punishing the people who are actually recruiting them, we punish the people who are already being exploited and send them back just like we did in 1948 on airplanes or buses or trains. And then we build a wall and we say, look, make America great again. Well, there was nothing great about any of that. No self-made man in any of that. It was all about exploiting the labor of those who could not say no. So when we read this passage of Mark, Jesus is making a radical statement. He's saying, step out of your tribe, step out of your born-to family, your natural family, and recognize that you're a citizen of the world, that your family is the world place, the people who are around you, your brothers and sister and mother, and not just the people you were born to. I'd like for you to give some serious thought to the Tulsa Race Massacre and the other massacres that happened around the country. Denton, Texas is another one you should look at. The black folks lived and flourished and prospered in one area, and the white folks just went in to it in the 1920s and killed them and ran them off and took it as their own. And then we say, well, reparations? Why, they don't deserve reparations. That's a thief's comment. Okay. It's time for reparations to be made, not because they have a right, but because we have a soul that needs healing, and we must heal that soul by making sacrifices to those whom we have exploited. So that's my message for the week. My grandfather went on to, actually he was run out of Tulsa. No one would do business with him. He was a builder. He built homes and suddenly found that banks wouldn't lend him money and people wouldn't do business with him. So he went to work for a construction company, the McCarthy Brothers, and found himself, he built huge buildings. He built a dormitory in Warrensburg at the university there. He built a very large federal building in St. Joseph, Missouri. And when he went there to build it, he had some black folks on his crew. I think he was an engineer of some kind. And they were all staying in the same hotel. And the hotel owner said, no, you can't have black folks staying here. That's not right. It's whites only. And so my grandfather picked up the phone. He called the McCarthy brothers. He says, I'm leaving. Okay, they either accept us all, or we're all just going to pack up and go. And it turned out that black man was given proper accommodations with the other folks in his entourage. It doesn't take much. It takes some courage. It takes some commitment. It takes willingness. And it takes an understanding that Jesus was no coward. When he stood up to the Romans, he knew exactly who he was standing up to. Okay? He knew exactly where they got their power. He knew exactly what kind of power it was. And so he knew that one doesn't just stand up to the Romans and have a happy ending. He was an example for all of us. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you in about 3 weeks. Enjoy the beginnings of summer. Enjoy the decline of COVID. Stay masked. Get your vaccinations. And I'll be speaking with you within a month. Cheers and God bless.